I'm really delighted that our next guest is here today. She's the first woman to run a Fortune 500 company based in India and has been named to our Fortune Most Powerful Women list, international list, the last 3 years in a row. As the CEO of India's biggest lender by assets, she's a force in India's financial and banking sectors. Please help me welcome the CEO of the State Bank of India, Arundhati Bhattacharya. So Arundhati, we had to wedge her out of all the media interviews she's doing while she's here. There's a lot of interest in you and what you're doing, and congratulations on being on the Fortune Most Powerful Women list. It's an honor to have you here. Arundhati, you run this massive institution, $460 billion in assets, but you didn't want to be a banker. That was not top of mind when you were growing up. Tell us about that and how you ended up in this sphere.
Right. Actually, when I was growing up, I think I was more interested in becoming a doctor. And in India, as you know, there are these competitive examinations. And I cracked that, and I was offered a place to do medicine. But at that point of time, my father was on the verge of retiring, and it used to take more than 7 years to do a degree in medicine. So the principal of our college, he suggested that as I was good in English, I should look for a career in journalism. And that's how I got to study literature. While studying, at the end of the graduation, these examinations for working in a bank, these were called probationary officers entrance exam, that came up. And actually, you know, we had a bet amongst some of our friends as to who could crack the exam. And it was really as a bet, we went and appeared for it. It just so happened that I did get through the exam. And therefore, you know, it was a little bit of a chance that I sort of got into the bank. So it was not something that was a considered decision at all.
So what's your career advice to women growing out of that?
Well, one career advice that I would love to give women is that they need to dare. They must not hold themselves back. In fact, you know, in many of such meetings, when people read out my biodata, they hesitate to say that I'm a major in literature, because they feel, you know, it's odd that a major in literature is running such a big bank. Means it's okay if you have majored in commerce or in economics or some such related subject. And in fact, they feel more embarrassed than I do regarding my credentials. But the fact of the matter is that if you really love what you're doing and you want to do it, then you must go ahead and do it. And don't worry about the challenges. Very often we make the challenges bigger than they are. And I very often say that, you know, it's like driving on a highway on a dark night. You can't see beyond the headlights, but it appears that there's a precipice there. Actually, it's not a precipice. As you go ahead, the road opens up for you. And I think that's precisely what has happened to me.
I love that analogy. And by the way, I don't know if you all know, Christine Lagarde, the managing director of the IMF, was trained as a lawyer and was bad in math in high school. So you never know. I love that analogy. So since our time is short, we're going to go straight into India. You and I were talking about, you know, the growth rate there is 7%. Seems like things are going well. But you're concerned about the growth rate and job creation. Describe that.
Well, India is a very young country, median age of 26 and a half. And we are adding something like 10 to 12 million people a year to the work stream. Now, in order to ensure that all of these people are able to achieve their aspiration, and aspiration level today is very high given the kind of information access they have because of the internet and the TV, it's important for us to be able to create many more jobs. And for that, I think, you know, the GDP growth, though 7% is really a very nice number, but given the kind of demography we have, I think we should aim for close to a double-digit GDP number.
And what are the prospects of that happening? And you're concerned about investment levels as well.
Well, 2 or 3 things that the government is doing. One, of course, is that the government is very actively pursuing the Make in India agenda. But more than that, I think one of the strengths of India is its entrepreneurial ability. So even today, if you go to the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities of India, you will find many, many small businesses. And that is something that the government is trying to empower. So in Bangalore, for instance, we have what is called India Silicon Valley with a lot of fintech entrepreneurs. But it's not only fintech. You see a lot of entrepreneurship in various areas. One of the reasons why I believe India has done very well in services is because services companies don't need too much of capital, which we don't have. Manufacturing, on the other hand, needs a lot of capital. We've done well in services because our people have set up businesses with very low capital base. But because they are entrepreneurial in nature, they have found out ways and means of how this can be done. So I think, we need to do more in order to empower such people. The government today has mandated or created certain programs by which such people can actually access small value loans. And as a bank, we have certain targets of ensuring that these small entrepreneurs are able to access credit. We have separate targets for women and people from what are called the backward castes, that is the less enabled classes. And I think it's important as banks that we work on programs for these people. But along with that, I think what is also very important is to get more capital infusion into the country. And that is where I think India is looking to the rest of the world, because it is a place where there is a good absorption capacity for capital, which currently within the country is still a little deficient.
And there's a whole conversation to be had about why it's difficult to get more capital in, but there is innovation throughout the country and in the banking sector where you were talking to me about some really interesting innovations that actually is broadening banking to the unbanked population.
That's
Describe that.
So, in India, what has happened is traditionally the government has been giving a lot of subsidies to the below poverty level people. But there was huge leakage because it couldn't be ensured that the people who are supposed to get these subsidies were actually getting them. As a result, the government was giving subsidies across the board. For instance, for cooking gas, there was a subsidy of 800 rupees per cylinder, though people like us obviously don't need those subsidies. Right. But there was no way of targeting this. So one thing that the government has done is it has created a unique identification number for individual citizens by capturing the biometrics, that is the 10 fingerprints and the retina scan. So today, out of a 1.3 billion population, 1.1 million people have these numbers, which are called the Aadhaar number. They are unique identifier numbers. Now, the second stage that the government did was they asked that these numbers be linked to bank accounts. Now, the moment you did that, you would be able to identify individuals and be able to pay the benefit only once. So in respect of cooking gas, whereas there were 150 million people who were buying cooking gas and getting subsidy, the moment you linked it to the number and made it a single person who would be able to access this, the number came down to 120 million. Now, out of that, again, the government appealed to people who didn't really need the subsidy to give it up. And I'm told close to 30 million people have given up the subsidy. So there itself, the outgo of the subsidy has come down sharply, and it is now more targeted to people. So the government has created what is called first the identifier, then linked it to the bank accounts. And now what the government is doing is it is enabling these bank accounts to be totally interoperable. So post the demonetization, they have created what is called the UPI, the Unified Payment Interface. Now, what happens here is you are required to download an app and create a virtual address over there. Now, if I also have an app of any bank, it doesn't have to be the same bank as yours, I can use that virtual address or your phone number to make payment to you. So you can transfer money from any account to any account, irrespective of the bank you are in. And all of this goes through in the real-time space seamlessly. and there are a number of security features there. So this is a kind of payment system that is unique in the world. And I think, you know, these are the kinds of strategies that has been used by India in order to actually capture the power of digital in order to serve the masses.
Questions about India broadly? Yes. Oh, we have a couple right over here.
Thank you. Susan Oliver from Australia. Having visited India several times, I feel that infrastructure is probably one of the critical agendas you would have. Could you explain to us how the bank is involved in getting roads and networks, rail networks, etc., to support that economic activity?
Sure. I think you have sort of hit the nail on the head, because it is only by creating the right kind of infrastructure that we can create better capacity for absorption of this capital. As you know, from 2009 to 2012, there was a huge burst of infrastructure investment in the country. Subsequent to that, what happened is, because of the way this growth happened, and because a lot of shortcuts were taken for allocating these resources to various people, a number of questions got asked regarding the non-transparent manner in which it was done. As a result, many of these infrastructure projects got stranded. And that resulted in a lot of non-performing assets on the bank's books. Today, we are resolving each of these individually. And what we are doing for the growth going forward, we have tried to learn the lessons that this particular downturn has taught us. So today, for instance, when a road is bid out, we try to ensure that 80% of contiguous land is available, and all clearances, including environmental clearances, are all available. Because if that is not the case, then there will be time overruns leading to cost overruns, and then the whole project gets over-leveraged and is not viable anymore. So therefore, you know, the lessons learned in the last downturn have been internalized by us. We are constantly talking to policymakers to change policies so as to ensure that the next round of infrastructure growth that we will see happens on a better platform. Not only that, we are also trying to push more of this investment to come from the markets. So today, the corporate bond market is much more vibrant than it was 5 years back. And we are also trying to ensure that we bring in not only more players into the bond market, but we ourselves act as market makers to some extent by giving bid offer prices, etc., to give more depth and liquidity to those markets. So I think, you know, we have learned quite a bit from the downturn that happened after 2011. And going forward, we do see a lot of infrastructure growth. It could be in areas like transmission, roads, ports, inland waterways, in the area of railways, in the area of urban infrastructure, smart cities. So you name it, I think we are working on some area or the other. We are also seeking a lot of help from the multilateral agencies, especially in things like renewables, etc., where we do not have that kind of experience. And the multilateral agencies, many of them have offered to give us their expertise to ensure that we don't make the kind of mistakes we made in the last round.
So we have time for one more question.
I'm Adair Fox-Martin from SAP. Could you comment on GST and the impact that you think that will have on India and its opportunity?
Sure. GST is basically, as you know, an output tax, and it's going to be levied at one place. What that will do is create a common market for India. Today, because of the very many state borders, a truckload of goods coming from, say, a place close to Delhi, going down to Mumbai port, sometimes could take as much as 19 days. Instead, if you imported the same stuff from, say, a place like Iran, you could probably get it in 4 days. So, you know, there was a lot of inefficiency that was arising as a result of the very many state taxes. Today with GST, it is expected that this will become seamless. And therefore, to that extent, the efficiencies that it will create in the system is expected to add to GDP by almost 1 to 2%. So it's a very powerful weapon. However, you know, it will also depend upon its implementation. As you know, we have a federal structure, and the states have to sort of agree to do what they are doing. Right now, a few things from the state side has been kept outside of GST, things like land, real estate, things like petroleum products, things like alcohol. All of these things have been kept outside of GST. But our hope is that we should start somewhere, and thereafter, once the states become comfortable with the way this is administered, they will agree to put everything in. But it is something that is very powerful, that is important for a country like India, and I think it's going to improve our GDP definitely, at least by 100 basis points.
Arundhati, thank you for that powerful overview of India. There's so much more to talk about, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure being here. Thank you.